The night it all started is burned into my memory like a scar that will never fade. My wife and I had finally found peace after years of working, saving, and struggling through the chaos of city life. We had moved into our lake cabin, away from nosy neighbors and endless rules, enjoying the kind of quiet most people only dream about. That night was calm, the moon reflecting off the water, the crickets singing, and the smell of pine drifting through the open windows. We were about to turn in for bed when a thunderous pounding rattled the front door. I froze. My wife looked at me with wide, questioning eyes. The pounding came again, this time harder, as voices shouted from outside. "Open up. HOA enforcement. You're in violation." My blood ran cold. HOA enforcement? That didn't make sense. I wasn't in any HOA. My land was deeded privately, completely outside their control. Still, the pounding grew louder, and the voices grew angrier. I walked to the door and peered through the window. 3 men stood on the porch, each wearing dark uniforms and shiny badges that caught the moonlight. For a moment, it almost looked official. But something didn't sit right. Their uniforms didn't match, their boots were scuffed, and the badges looked cheap, like props from a costume shop. One man, tall and broad with a shaved head, barked again, "You've got 10 seconds to open this door, or we're coming in." My wife grabbed my arm, whispering that something wasn't right. I agreed, but before I could answer, they started pounding harder, the wood shaking under their fists. I cracked the door open, keeping my foot behind it, and asked what this was about. The leader shoved a paper in my face. "Illegal construction, unpaid fines, violation of HOA code. You've been warned. This is our last visit." My temper flared. I told him I didn't live under any HOA, that they had no authority here, and that they needed to leave my property immediately. The men laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "We're the authority here," the shaved-head one sneered. Before I could slam the door, he shoved it wide open, and the 3 of them stormed inside. My wife gasped and stepped forward, demanding they leave. One of them, a wiry man with cold eyes, grabbed her arm roughly and twisted it back. The sound that followed still haunts me, the sickening crack of bone giving way. My wife screamed, collapsing to the ground in agony. For a split second, time froze. Her face was twisted in pain, tears streaming down as she clutched her arm. That was the moment the rage inside me exploded. I lunged at the man who hurt her, but before I could land a blow, the other 2 grabbed me. They pinned my arms back, holding me tight while the wiry one smirked at me. "Maybe this will teach you to follow the rules," he hissed. I struggled, every muscle straining to break free, but their grip was iron. My wife lay on the floor, sobbing, begging them to stop. I shouted that they had no right, that this was assault, but the men didn't care. They tossed the paper onto my table, a fake citation full of legal jargon and nonsense about HOA violations. It was nothing but a piece of paper meant to scare me. They sneered at my helplessness, then shoved me backward so hard I stumbled into the wall. Before I could recover, they bolted for the door, laughing as they disappeared into the night. The sound of their boots pounding down the steps echoed like thunder. Then silence, broken only by my wife's quiet, pained sobs. I dropped to my knees beside her, my hands trembling as I tried to comfort her. Her arm was swollen and bent at an angle no arm should ever be. I felt sick, a mix of guilt, rage, and helplessness boiling inside me. She whispered through tears that she was scared, that those men might come back. I promised her right then and there that no one would ever hurt her again, not while I was alive. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe, but one thing was clear, this wasn't going to end with me filing a complaint. This was going to end with them paying for what they did. I scooped her up carefully, carrying her to the truck, every bump in the road making her wince in pain. As I sped toward the hospital, my mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. Who were these men? Why target us? Why pretend to be HOA officers when they had no jurisdiction here? Questions spun in my head, but they all boiled down to one answer: they thought we were easy targets. They thought they could scare us, hurt us, and walk away like nothing happened. They thought wrong. At the hospital, the doctors confirmed what I already knew: her arm was broken in 2 places. They set it in a cast, gave her pain medication, and reassured us that it would heal, but healing wouldn't erase the memory of that night. It wouldn't erase the sight of her crying on the floor while those cowards laughed. As she slept in her hospital bed, exhausted from the pain, I sat beside her, staring at the fake citation they had left behind. My fists clenched around the paper, crumpling it until it was nothing but a ball of trash. My jaw tightened as I made a vow in the quiet of that sterile room. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. They had crossed a line you don't come back from. They had hurt my wife, violated my home, and disrespected everything I had built. The law might take its time, but I wasn't going to wait. My wife needed justice, and I was going to deliver it myself. Somewhere out there, those fake officers were celebrating their little victory, thinking they had gotten away with it. But what they didn't know was that I had family. Family that didn't play by their rules. Family that didn't back down from a fight. And when I called them, the whole world would shake. That night in the hospital, holding my wife's hand as she slept, I felt something shift deep inside me. I wasn't just a husband anymore. I was a man on a mission. And those men who thought they were predators? They were about to find out they had just become the hunted. When the sun rose the next morning, the anger inside me had not faded, it had only grown sharper, like a blade being forged in fire. My wife lay in her hospital bed, her arm in a cast, her face pale but calm from the medication. I sat by her side, holding her good hand, and every time I looked at her, a new wave of rage surged through me. I promised her quietly that she would never be alone in this, that those men would never get the chance to lay a hand on her again. She squeezed my hand weakly and told me not to do anything stupid, but the truth was, I already knew what had to be done. The sheriff came by around mid-morning after getting my call. He was an older man, someone who had dealt with plenty of trouble in his years, but when I showed him the crumpled citation those fake officers had left, he frowned deeply. He turned the paper over in his hands, studied the wording, and finally shook his head. "This isn't legitimate," he said flatly. "This looks like it was typed up on a home printer. These men weren't officers of anything. They're imposters." My jaw clenched. I had known it, but hearing it confirmed only fueled my anger. I demanded to know who they were and why they targeted us. The sheriff sighed and explained that there had been whispers about a group of thugs around the area, hired muscle pretending to be HOA enforcers. Their goal was to intimidate landowners, trick them into paying fake fines, and scare them into compliance. Most folks caved in either out of fear or because they didn't want trouble. But me? I wasn't built to bow down. The sheriff promised to investigate, but I could tell by the tone of his voice that this wasn't going to be solved quickly. Men like that knew how to vanish, how to hide in the cracks of the system. They'd move on to another target, maybe hurt someone else, and by the time the law caught up, the damage would be done. My wife didn't have the luxury of waiting for justice to crawl forward at a snail's pace. She deserved swift action, and that was something I could provide. After the sheriff left, I sat alone in the hospital cafeteria with a bitter cup of coffee, staring at my reflection in the dark liquid. My mind wasn't on the coffee, it was on family. My cousins. They weren't saints by any means, but they were men of honor in their own way. Tough, loyal, and unafraid of conflict. My cousin Bear was their leader, the kind of man whose very name sent shivers through people who crossed him. He and his crew rode hard, lived harder, and most importantly, stood by blood no matter the cost. We didn't talk every day, but when we did, it was like no time had passed. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to his number, and hit dial. The line clicked, and his gravelly voice answered, haven't heard from you in a while, cousin. What's wrong? I told him everything, the pounding on the door, the fake officers, the broken arm, the laughter as they ran off. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, the kind of silence that spoke louder than words. Then Bear's voice came back, colder than ice. Send me the address. My chest tightened with both relief and anticipation. You don't have to, I started, but he cut me off. Family comes first. Nobody hurts blood and walks away. I'll be there tonight. By the time evening rolled around, the distant rumble of motorcycles echoed through the valley like thunder. The sound grew louder and louder until finally, a convoy of bikes rolled into my driveway. 15 men in leather jackets, their vests patched with their club's insignia, their eyes hard and unforgiving. At the front was Bear, a mountain of a man with a thick beard and arms covered in tattoos. He cut the engine, pulled off his helmet, and walked straight up to me. Without a word, he pulled me into a rough embrace. You all right, cousin? He asked. I shook my head, glancing back toward the cabin. She's not. Her arm's broken. They came in pretending to be HOA officers. Bear's eyes narrowed like a predator spotting prey. Then we hunt, he said simply. The crew dismounted, gathering around as I explained everything. Each word seemed to stoke their anger like logs being thrown on a fire. These were men who had lived their whole lives by codes of respect and loyalty. To them, hurting a woman, especially family, was an unforgivable sin. By the time I finished talking, their jaws were clenched, their fists tight, and I knew they were ready to move. But Bear wasn't reckless. He asked questions, wanted details, wanted to know who these men really were. I told him about the sheriff's warning, about how they had been terrorizing homeowners for months. Bear nodded slowly. Sounds like cowards hiding behind a fake badge. The kind of cowards who need to be taught fear. One of his men, a wiry guy named Snake, cracked his knuckles and grinned. Let's drag them out by their teeth. We didn't have to wait long for a lead. My neighbor, old Mr. Turner, came over after hearing the roar of motorcycles outside. His eyes widened at the sight of the crew, but when he learned why they were there, he didn't hesitate. Saw a black pickup yesterday, he said. 3 guys in uniforms got out. They headed toward the old warehouse down by the tracks. Place has been abandoned for years, but I've seen lights there at night. That was all Bear needed. He turned to his men, pointed toward the highway, and barked, "Mount up." Before we left, I checked on my wife. She was resting, her pain dulled by the medication, but I kissed her forehead and whispered, "I'll be back soon. I promise." I don't know if she heard me, but I meant every word. The engines roared to life again, filling the night with a sound that sent chills through anyone who wasn't on our side. As we pulled onto the road, the convoy stretched behind me like a river of steel and fury. The ride to the warehouse was a blur, the cool night air whipping past my face as adrenaline surged through me. Every mile brought me closer to the men who thought they could break into my home, hurt my wife, and vanish without consequences. They had no idea what was coming for them. No idea that a storm was about to descend on their little hideout. I glanced in my mirror, seeing the line of bikes following close, their headlights glowing like fireflies in the dark. For the first time since that night, I didn't feel helpless. I felt powerful. I felt ready. When we reached the edge of town, Bear raised his fist, and the convoy slowed to a crawl. In the distance, I could see the warehouse, dark, run down, but faint light leaked through the cracks of the boarded windows. Bear parked his bike behind an old shed, and the rest followed. We gathered in a tight circle, our breaths fogging in the cool air. Bear looked around at each of us, his voice steady and commanding. They thought they could hide behind fake uniforms. They thought they could hurt family without consequence. Tonight, we show them how wrong they were. No mercy. The men nodded, silent but deadly serious. I felt my heartbeat hammering in my chest, but it wasn't fear, it was anticipation. The moment was here. The hunt was about to begin. And those fake officers had no idea that their little game had ended the second they laid hands on my wife. The night air was thick with tension as we crouched in the shadows outside that warehouse, the faint glow of light seeping through the cracks in the boarded windows. My heart pounded like a drum, not from fear but from the rage and anticipation bubbling inside me. The men who had broken into my home and hurt my wife were just a few yards away, probably thinking they had gotten away with everything. They didn't know a storm was waiting outside their door, a storm made of leather jackets, roaring engines, and the kind of loyalty that only family can bring. Bear looked at me, his eyes like steel, and asked quietly, "You ready for this, cousin?" I nodded without hesitation. I wasn't just ready, I was desperate for it. Bear motioned to Snake and two others to scout around the sides of the warehouse. They moved like shadows, their boots crunching softly on gravel. The rest of us stayed low, watching, listening. Through the cracks in the boards, I caught glimpses of movement inside. Figures pacing, the flicker of a cheap lamp, and the unmistakable sound of laughter. My blood boiled. They were in there, joking around, probably drinking, not a care in the world after leaving my wife broken and in pain. I clenched my fists so hard my knuckles popped. Minutes passed before Snake returned, his grin sharp and dangerous. 3 of them inside, just like you said. Trucks parked out back. Looks like they've been crashing here. Bear nodded, then turned to me. You want the honors, cousin? My throat felt dry, but I forced the words out. I want them to see me. I want them to know exactly who came for them. Bear's lips curled into a fierce smile. Good. Then we do this loud. The plan was simple, no sneaking, no quiet takedown. We were going to hit them with the same force they had brought to my door, only multiplied by 15. Bear raised his arm, and with a single gesture, the bikers spread out around the building. Engines roared to life, shattering the stillness of the night. Headlights blazed, casting beams across the cracked concrete. The warehouse lit up like a stage, and the men inside scrambled in panic. The door burst open, and the 3 fake officers stumbled out, blinking against the sudden light. They were still wearing those ridiculous uniforms, badges hanging crooked on their chests. The tall, bald one stepped forward, trying to bark commands, "Stay back. We're law enforcement." His voice cracked with fear, and I could hear the uncertainty in every word. Bear laughed, a deep, menacing sound that rolled across the lot. Law enforcement doesn't break a woman's arm for speaking the truth. The men looked around, realizing they were surrounded. 15 bikers, engines growling like beasts, eyes locked on them like prey. They shifted nervously, their false bravado crumbling with every passing second. I stepped forward, holding the crumpled fake citation they had left on my table. My voice carried through the night, sharp and unshakable. You remember me? You remember my wife? You thought you could come into my home, hurt her, and walk away? The wiry one, the same one who had twisted my wife's arm, sneered, though I could see the flicker of fear in his eyes. We were just doing our job. You were warned. My rage exploded. I lunged at him before Bear even had a chance to stop me, grabbing him by the collar and slamming him against the wall of the warehouse. His head snapped back with a dull thud, and his fake badge clattered to the ground. Your job? I snarled. Your job is assaulting women? Your job is terrorizing families? He stammered, trying to find words, but all that came out was a pathetic whimper. The bald leader tried to move forward, but 2 of Bear's men blocked him. They weren't gentle about it. One shoved him hard in the chest while the other pressed a heavy boot against his shin, forcing him to stumble. Snake stepped up behind the 3rd man, twisting his arm behind his back with a snap that made him yelp. Not so fun when it's you getting grabbed, huh? Snake growled. The wiry man in my grip broke first. His defiance collapsed, and his voice shook as he begged, "We were hired, all right? We don't care about your land. We were paid to scare you." My grip tightened on his shirt. "By who?" I demanded. His eyes darted nervously, flicking toward the bald leader as if hoping for guidance. But when Bear stepped closer, his massive frame casting a shadow over all of us, the man caved. "The HOA board. From that community down by the lake. They said you were a problem, that you didn't follow the rules, that you needed to be taught a lesson." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. All this, the invasion of my home, my wife's broken arm, the fake citations, it wasn't random. It wasn't just three thugs on a power trip. It was a calculated attack ordered by the very people who had been pestering me for months, trying to bully me into giving up my land. The HOA board had decided to send hired muscle when intimidation letters didn't work. I shoved the wiry man away from me, disgusted, and turned to Bear. It was them. The board. They're behind this. Bear's eyes darkened, his jaw tightening as he glanced at his crew. "Then they've just declared war on the wrong family." The bald leader tried to salvage what little pride he had left. "You don't know what you're dealing with. Those people have money, power, connections. You take us down, and they'll come after you harder." His warning didn't faze Bear. He leaned in close, his voice low and deadly. "Money doesn't mean a damn thing when you can't sleep at night, wondering who's coming for you. Power crumbles when the people you send don't come back." The bikers dragged the three men into the middle of the lot, forcing them to kneel under the glare of the headlights. They were trembling now, their fake uniforms nothing but costumes stripped of their false authority. I walked up to them, holding the fake citation high before tearing it into pieces and letting the scraps flutter to the ground. "This is all your power amounts to. Paper and lies." For a long moment, the only sounds were the idling engines and the fake officer's ragged breathing. Then Bear spoke, his voice carrying the weight of final judgment. "You're going to deliver a message for us. You tell your bosses we know who they are, what they did, and what's coming next. You tell them the family they tried to break is still standing. And if they think they can come after us again, they better be ready to face all of us." The fake officers nodded frantically, desperate to escape the circle of bikers. But Bear wasn't done. He gestured to Snake, who grinned wickedly and stepped forward with a pair of bolt cutters. Without hesitation, he snipped the badges off their uniforms, letting them fall uselessly to the dirt. "You're done playing cops," Snake spat. "Next time you try, you won't be walking away." We let them crawl back to their truck, stripped of their fake authority, their pride shattered. They sped off into the night, tires squealing, probably racing straight to the very HOA board that had sent them. And that was exactly what we wanted. Because now, the board would know the truth. They hadn't scared me into silence. They hadn't broken my spirit. They had started something much bigger than they could control. As the dust settled, Bear turned to me. "This isn't over. They'll be waiting for us now." I nodded, my chest heaving with the adrenaline of the confrontation. "Good," I said. "Let them wait. I want them to know we're coming." That night, standing in the glow of motorcycle headlights with my cousins by my side, I felt a shift deep inside. The fear that had hung over me since that night at my cabin was gone. In its place was fire, determination, and the unshakable knowledge that justice wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. The HOA had made their move. Now, it was our turn. The ride to the HOA President's neighborhood felt like something out of a movie. 15 motorcycles in a thunderous convoy cutting through the night, their headlights glowing like a stream of fire across the dark highway. The roar of engines wasn't just noise, it was a warning, a message that we were coming. I rode at the front with Bear, my chest tight with anticipation. The fake officers had spilled the truth, and now we knew exactly who had orchestrated the attack on my wife. It wasn't just a random gang. It was the HOA board from the wealthy community down by the lake, the same one that had been trying to intimidate me into giving up my land. They had crossed a line by sending thugs to my doorstep, and tonight they were going to learn there are consequences for hurting family. As we got closer, the pristine gates of their neighborhood loomed ahead, polished metal gleaming under the streetlights. Normally, those gates were meant to keep people out, to give the board members a false sense of security. But tonight, they were nothing more than a fragile barrier in the path of a storm. Bear revved his engine, and the rest followed suit, the noise echoing off the hills like rolling thunder. The guard on duty stepped out of his booth, his eyes widening at the sight of us. He stammered something about not being allowed in, but Bear cut him off with a glare so cold the man froze in place. "We're not asking permission," Bear growled, and the gates were pushed open by brute force as the bikes surged through. The streets inside were lined with perfect lawns, spotless sidewalks, and luxury homes worth millions. But tonight, it all looked hollow, like a stage set about to be torn down. Neighbors peeked out of windows, lights flicked on, and whispers filled the air as we roared through the community. People weren't used to seeing bikers in their carefully controlled world. They weren't used to the sight of raw power rolling through streets that usually echoed only with golf carts and designer cars. And at the center of it all stood the HOA President's mansion, a massive house with columns and spotless landscaping, the kind of place meant to scream power and status. We pulled up onto his perfectly paved driveway, engines revving so loud the windows rattled. The front door burst open, and out stumbled the HOA President himself, still in a silk robe, his hair messy from sleep. He froze at the sight of us, his face draining of color. For a moment, he tried to puff himself up, to look like a man in control, but I saw the fear in his eyes. He knew exactly why we were there. I stepped off my bike, walked right up to his porch, and held out the torn remnants of the fake citation his men had left in my cabin. I threw the scraps at his feet. "Recognize this?" I shouted. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came. Behind me, Bear and the bikers fanned out across the lawn, their presence filling the night with an unspoken threat. The president finally found his voice, though it shook. "This is private property. You can't just come here like this." Bear stepped forward, towering over him. "Private property," he rumbled. "That's rich coming from a man who sends criminals into other people's homes. You sent your dogs to my cousin's house. They broke into his cabin. They broke his wife's arm. And now you stand here, hiding behind a bathrobe and fancy walls?" The president's face flushed red, but his voice was weak. "I don't know what you're talking about. Those men weren't connected to us." I laughed bitterly, stepping closer until I was inches from him. "They confessed. They said you paid them. Said the board wanted me gone because I wouldn't bow down to your fake authority." I jabbed a finger at his chest, my rage boiling over. "You thought you could buy fear. But you bought yourself a war." Neighbors had gathered on sidewalks now, watching the confrontation. Some looked shocked, others looked almost relieved, as if they had been waiting for someone to finally stand up to the board. The president glanced nervously at them, his mask of control slipping further. "You don't understand," he whispered harshly. "We have rules. We have to keep order. People like you ruin it. You make it harder for us to maintain control." Bear's laugh was low and dangerous. "You mean harder for you to line your pockets? Harder for you to bully people into doing what you want?" He leaned in close, his voice like gravel. "Well, you just lost control." At that moment, headlights appeared down the street, and a sheriff's cruiser rolled up. For a second, the president looked triumphant, like salvation had arrived. He turned toward the flashing lights, ready to play the victim. But the sheriff stepped out, tipped his hat, and walked straight past the president to stand beside me. "Heard you caught some troublemakers," the sheriff said. "And I hear they confessed to who sent them. The president's face turned ghostly white. "This is harassment," he sputtered. "You can't believe them over me. I'm the HOA president." The sheriff shook his head slowly, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "What I believe," he said calmly, "is that 3 men were caught impersonating officers, assaulting a woman, and trespassing. And they all pointed straight to you." The bikers roared in approval, the sound rattling the street as the sheriff clamped the cuffs on the stunned president. His protests grew louder, but his words were drowned out by the engines. Neighbors clapped quietly, some even cheering, as the so-called man of power was led down his own driveway like a common criminal. I turned to look at Bear, my chest heaving with relief. My wife was still in the hospital, still in pain, but justice was finally being served. For the first time in days, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. Bear clapped a heavy hand on my back. "Told you, cousin. Nobody hurts family and gets away with it." As the sheriff drove off with the HOA president in the back seat, the bikers began to mount their motorcycles again. Engines roared to life, filling the night with the sound of victory. The neighbors stood silently, watching us with wide eyes, but I noticed something in their faces: hope. Maybe for the first time, they saw that the board wasn't untouchable. Maybe they realized they didn't have to live under fear anymore. Before leaving, Bear turned one last time toward the mansion and shouted, "Tell the rest of your board, if they even think about coming after family again, we'll be back." His voice carried through the night, echoing off the pristine homes, a promise written in steel and thunder. The convoy rolled out of the neighborhood the same way it came in, loud, unshakable, and united. As we sped down the highway, wind whipping through my hair, I thought about my wife's face when I would tell her what happened. I thought about the strength it took to survive this, and the family who had stood beside me when I needed them most. The HOA had thought they were the hunters, but they had just learned the hard way that we were the wolves. And from that night forward, I knew one thing for certain. No matter how much money, power, or influence they had, they would never break me, never scare my wife, and never again forget the lesson that family always fights back.